According to the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, anger is not just a fleeting emotion that disappears. It is a very powerful karmic force. It silently accumulates, subtly guiding words, actions, and even the direction of life, without many people even realizing it. There are many people who aren't inherently evil. They don't intentionally hurt anyone. They don't harbor ill will. But simply because they are quick-tempered, react impulsively, or speak based on fleeting emotions, they inadvertently leak away their blessings little by little. It's like a precious water jar. No one breaks it, but each day a drop leaks out. By the time they realize it, it's already empty. Words spoken in anger can leave a wound in someone's heart for years. An impulsive action can ruin a relationship. A decision made while consumed by rage can alter one's future. The important thing is that after the anger subsides, people often regret their actions, but the consequences are not easily reversed. Sixth Patriarch Huineng looked deeply into this point. He didn't just speak of lofty principles, but pointed directly to very ordinary things. He said that karma doesn't only come from big things, but begins with a single thought in the mind. A thought of anger arises. If you don't recognize it, if you don't stop it, it will lead to words, then actions, then consequences. Everything happens very quickly, but the effects last a very long time. Perhaps you are easily irritated, easily annoyed, easily react when things don't go your way. Perhaps you've said things that hurt you later. Perhaps you've wished you had been calmer. If you've ever felt that way, this video isn't meant to blame you. It's meant to help you look at yourself more gently, to understand why anger diminishes your blessings, and how to maintain inner peace amidst the very real challenges of life. If you want to live a slower, gentler life, and with less negative karma each day, subscribe to the Simple Philosophy channel. Let's learn together how to master our minds and retain blessings for the years to come. 1. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not view anger as a minor character flaw. He did not see it as merely an innate temper or the influence of circumstances. He saw anger as a stream of karma, a silent but powerful flow. It does not appear once and then disappear, but tends to repeat itself, growing stronger over the years, if not enlightened and transformed. When the Sixth Patriarch called anger karma, he wanted to emphasize that it's not a temporary thing. Karma is something with inertia. Once created, it will continue. One instance of anger won't stop. There will be a second, a third, and then it will become a habitual reaction. Eventually, people no longer realize they are angry, but only see everything around them as annoying, irritating, and worth reacting to. Many people consider themselves straightforward. They speak quickly. They are hot-tempered but honest. But the Sixth Patriarch didn't stop at the surface. He looked deeper. He saw that behind every outburst of anger was an unseen thought. A thought of clinging to the ego, clinging to right and wrong, clinging to the idea that others must follow one's will. When this thought is not illuminated, it gives rise to anger. Anger gives rise to words. Words give rise to actions. And karma continues to be created. The danger of anger doesn't lie in a single outburst, but in its self-reinforcing nature. After each outburst, if one doesn't reflect and learn from the experience, they will unconsciously allow themselves to be angry again. Their minds have become accustomed to that reaction. It's like a well-worn path. The first time you walk it, it's bumpy. Walking it many times makes it a familiar route. To avoid walking it again requires great mindfulness. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that if one does not illuminate this stream of karma, it will follow them throughout their life, in their family, in their work, in their relationships. Any conflict will cause that stream of karma to resurface. Some people are old but still hot-tempered. Some people have experienced countless things but still react the same way. It's not because they are bad people, but because they have never looked directly at their own anger. Enlightenment here isn't about suppression. It's not about trying to appear gentle. It's about recognition. It's about seeing clearly when anger first arises, seeing where it comes from, what expectations it stems from, what fears it causes, which ego has been offended. When you see clearly, karma begins to weaken. Because the light of mindfulness always weakens karma. The Sixth Patriarch didn't demand perfection from people. He only reminded us that if we view anger as a personality trait, as caused by others, or by circumstances, then that karmic cycle will never stop. It will repeat itself. The context may change, but the essence remains the same. The person you're interacting with may change, but your reaction will be the same. Only when we dare to view anger as a part of our own karma, without blaming, justifying, or embellishing it, will we have the opportunity to transform it. And that is also the first step to retaining blessings for a lifetime to come. 2. Circumstances are merely contributing factors. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that all external events only serve as triggering conditions. The true root of anger lies in an unawakened mind. When the mind is deluded, even small circumstances can easily trigger a strong reaction. When the mind is clear, even the most difficult circumstances are merely gentle challenges along the way. People often blame circumstances because it's easier than looking at themselves. We say we got angry because someone said something harsh. That's why we were irritable because of work pressure, or that our family didn't understand us. But the Sixth Patriarch Huineng looked deeper. He pointed out that circumstances are merely the initial trigger, while the reaction originates from within. The same words. Some people hear them and find them normal. Others become angry. The same event. Some people consider it a minor matter. Others hold a grudge for days. The difference lies not in the circumstances, but in the level of mental awareness. The less enlightened the mind, the stronger the reaction. The more peaceful the mind, the less the circumstances can affect it. Many people think that if circumstances change, their anger will disappear. But the reality is that even if the environment changes, the people around them changes, and their living situation changes, anger still arises in a different form. This is because the root cause has not been addressed. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng called this not yet returning to oneself, not yet clearly seeing how one's own mind is functioning. An unawakened mind reacts very quickly. There's almost no pause between stimulus and reaction, no observation, no choice. Only old habits automatically kick in. And the strongest habit of an unawakened mind is resistance. It's opposition. It's protecting the ego. So anger often arises very naturally. Conversely, a clear mind isn't one that never encounters unpleasant situations. Rather, it's one that has enough space to observe. When an event occurs, a person with a clear mind recognizes the emotions arising, the growing discomfort, and the wounded ego. Because of this recognition, they don't get swept away immediately. They pause, and it is this pause that weakens the anger. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not deny the weight of circumstances. He understood that life is full of conflicts. But he emphasized that if one only focuses on changing circumstances without caring for the mind, one will always be led astray by circumstances. When circumstances are favorable, one will be happy. When circumstances are unfavorable, one will be angry. Thus, one will live a life dictated by external circumstances, without inner self-mastery. A clear mind is one that sees the impermanent nature of all things. Words pass away. Events change. Emotions fade. When one sees this clearly, they no longer overreact to small changes. They don't care about winning or losing in every word. They don't care about being superior or inferior in every situation. because they know that maintaining inner peace is far more important. When the mind is not yet clear, people easily identify themselves with their emotions. We think that we are the anger. We are right, the other person is wrong. But as the mind becomes clearer, we see that anger is only a temporary state. It comes and goes. It is not us. By realizing this, we no longer let it dictate our words and actions. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that cultivation is not about escaping circumstances, but about living amidst circumstances with a clear mind. A practitioner doesn't need to seek absolute tranquility, because if the mind isn't clear, suffering will arise everywhere. Conversely, when the mind is clear enough, one can maintain serenity even amidst noise. A person with a clear mind, when faced with difficulties, will ask themselves what they are learning. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they ask themselves where they are stuck, what they are expecting, and what they are afraid of. It is these introspective questions that help them grow. And because of this, difficulties become lessons, no longer sources of anger. When people understand that circumstances are merely a matter of chance, they stop blaming others, life, and themselves. They see that everything that happens has a deeper cause. Some things they can control, some they can't. They learn to accept what they can't control. What they can control is their attitude and mindset. And that's where improvement is needed. Sixth Patriarch Huineng pointed out that those who know how to cultivate their minds will gradually develop inner strength. This inner strength is not noisy. It is not ostentatious. But it is very firm. When faced with difficulties, they don't need to react hastily. They don't need to talk much. They don't need to prove right or wrong. It is this calmness that naturally makes difficult situations feel lighter. Not because the situation has changed, but because the mind has changed. Three, anger is not something we are born with. According to the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, anger is a psychological habit formed and nurtured over time. It grows from repeated reactions, from disappointments without reflection, and from negative emotions held back instead of being released. Therefore, anger is not fate, but a habit. And habits can be stopped when we clearly see the consequences. Many people say they've been hot-tempered since childhood, that it's just their personality. But if you look deeper, you'll see that no one is born knowing how to be angry. Newborn babies are only hungry, cold, tired, and cry to express their needs. Anger appears later, when the child learns that shouting can get attention, when they see that a strong reaction can help them get what they want. Gradually, that reaction becomes a habit. As I grew older, the habit of anger continued to be reinforced. Each outburst of anger, without any clear consequences, each loss of temper, still achieved its desired outcome. My mind learned that anger was the solution. Over time, even the slightest trigger would trigger a rapid outburst of anger. No thought, no choice needed, because my mind had become accustomed to that path. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that the danger is not the appearance of anger, but the failure to recognize it. When we don't see it, we identify ourselves with anger. We think it is us. We believe that reaction is right. And so, we continue to nurture it every day without realizing it. Psychological habits have a very distinct characteristic. They are strengthened by repetition and weakened by exposure to light. When a person begins to realize that each time they get angry, they lose blessings, harmony, and respect, they begin to stop. Initially, it's just a very brief pause, a deep breath, a moment of silence. But it is that very moment that breaks the old cycle of reaction. Anger exists because of ignorance, because we are not aware that we are being led astray by our emotions. When the light of awakening appears, anger no longer has a firm foothold. It may still arise, but it is no longer fueled. It is no longer nurtured by resentful thoughts, by sharp words, or by uncontrolled actions. Sixth Patriarch Huineng emphasized that realization is the first step to liberation. When we clearly see that anger is merely a state of mind, not our true nature, we no longer fear it. Nor do we need to suppress it. We simply observe it. And when observed long enough, it weakens on its own, like a fire running out of fuel. Someone asked how to stop being angry. The answer isn't about trying to control it, because the more you try to control it, the more tense your mind becomes, and the more likely anger is to erupt afterward. What you need to do is look it straight in the eye. See where it comes from. What thoughts, fears, and desires nourish it. When you see the root cause, you will no longer be blindly controlled by it. The habit of anger is often linked to a large ego, to the need to be right, to be superior, to be recognized. When these needs are not met, anger arises as a defense mechanism. But when we realize that our value doesn't depend on winning or losing in every situation, our hearts naturally soften, and the habit of anger no longer has a place to thrive. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach people to become cold or indifferent. He taught how to live mindfully. When we are mindful, we still feel discomfort, but we don't let it lead us astray. We still see injustice, but we don't react with anger. This difference creates lasting blessings. A person who begins to recognize the habit of getting angry will realize something very important. Every time they don't lose their temper, it's not that they lose, but that they win against themselves. Every time they remain silent, every time they maintain their composure, they accumulate inner strength. That inner strength isn't immediately apparent, but it subtly changes the quality of their life. When the old habit is no longer nurtured, a new habit forms. It's the habit of stopping, observing, breathing, choosing a slower response. Initially, the new habit is weak, but with each practice, it grows stronger. And eventually, the mind naturally becomes calm in the face of things that once caused it to explode. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that no anger is stronger than the light of enlightened understanding. Once we see this, we don't need to fight. We don't need to try to change anyone. We just need to turn inward and care for our own minds. And from there, life begins to change naturally. If you realize you also harbor a habit of anger and want to learn how to look deeper and stop it, continue to follow the Simple Philosophy channel. Subscribe to the channel so that each day we can illuminate our minds together, reduce anger, and cultivate peace from the very small things in daily life. 4. Anger doesn't just erupt from nowhere. According to the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, it always begins with a very small thought in the mind. So small that we often overlook it. A little dissatisfaction, a little hurt ego, a desire for everything to go exactly as we want. When that thought is not seen and illuminated, it silently grows, accumulates, and at one point, it erupts into anger that catches us off guard. People often think they get angry because of circumstances, because of what others say, because the situation is too unpleasant. But the Sixth Patriarch Huineng pointed out that circumstances are merely contributing factors. The root of anger lies in the mind, in how we perceive things. Two people are in the same situation. One remains calm, the other explodes. This shows that anger doesn't stem from the circumstances, but from the thoughts arising in each person's mind. Dissatisfaction is the first seed. It arises when we expect something, but it doesn't come true. When we feel we deserve better treatment. When we believe we've tried hard, but haven't been recognized. Dissatisfaction appears very subtly, just a feeling of dissatisfaction. But if we don't recognize it, this feeling will find more reasons to exist. It begins to compare, begins to judge, and gradually lays the groundwork for anger to develop. Damaged ego is fertile ground for anger. When the words or actions of others touch upon the self-image we've built, we feel belittled, rejected, and insulted. At this point, anger is no longer simply a reaction to the event, but a reaction to protect our ego. We're not angry about a big deal, but because we feel we're no longer respected as we hoped. The bigger the ego, the easier it is for anger to arise. A person who always wants to be right, wants to be superior, wants others' approval, will find it very difficult to remain calm. Just a glance, an unintentional word, a small delay, all are enough to trigger feelings of hurt. And when these feelings are not recognized, they quickly turn into resentment. The desire for things to go one's way is a deep-seated problem that many people overlook. Within each person's mind, there's a hidden script. Things should unfold this way. That person should behave this way. When life doesn't go according to that script, we become disappointed. We become frustrated. We react. This anger is the voice of non-acceptance, a refusal to accept that life is inherently impermanent. No one is obligated to fulfill our desires. It's worth noting that these small thoughts often arise very quickly. We're used to reacting, so we don't notice them in time. Only when anger flares up do we see the consequences. Words have been spoken. Actions have occurred. Relationships have been damaged. But by then, it's too late. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng emphasized that cultivation isn't about extinguishing anger when it's already raging, but about recognizing the first spark when it first appears. Recognizing the arising of thoughts requires mindfulness. This mindfulness doesn't come from books, but from observing oneself every day. Observe when the mind is uneasy, when the body is tense, when the breathing is rapid. These are all signs of unease arising. A person who practices mindfulness isn't someone who never gets angry, but someone who recognizes anger very early, before it even takes shape. When we understand that every anger begins with a very small thought, we begin to slow down. We no longer react hastily. We no longer jump to conclusions. We learn to ask ourselves, what am I dissatisfied with? Where is my ego being hurt? What desires are not being fulfilled? Just by asking these questions, the light of mindfulness emerges. Gradually, we realize that much of the anger in life is unnecessary. It doesn't protect us. It doesn't make us better. It only tires us out, drains away blessings. When we see this clearly, the mind naturally lets go. And when the mind lets go, the surroundings become lighter as well. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach people to become weak. He taught how to be strong from within. Strength comes from not letting small, ignorant thoughts lead you astray. When you master your thoughts, you master your words. When you master your words, you master your actions. And from there, the later stages of a person's life are transformed in a very subtle but lasting way. Every time we recognize and stop before a thought of anger, we save ourselves from negative karma. Every time we choose silence instead of outburst, we preserve a portion of blessings for the future. This is the path that the Sixth Patriarch Huineng pointed out. It's not far-fetched. It's not mysterious. It begins with clearly seeing a very small thought in our hearts each day. Many people only regret their anger after it has subsided. They regret saying harsh words. They regret doing something unworthy. But by then, the karma has already been sown. The wound has already been inflicted. The relationship has already been damaged. The price of anger is not just a few minutes of frustration. Sometimes it can be years of separation, years of remorse. Years of carrying the negative consequences that one doesn't want? According to the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, the mind is like the person holding the reins. Words and actions are like the horse. If the person holding the reins is not mindful, the horse will charge forward instinctively. When anger arises and is not recognized, it immediately dictates speech. The voice becomes harsh. The words become sharp. Then the body acts reflexively, slamming the table, leaving, shouting, slamming the door. These things happen very quickly, but the consequences last. The most dangerous thing is that people often justify their anger. We say that the other person was wrong, that the situation was too tense, that we endured for too long. But the Sixth Patriarch Huineng reminded us that when we justify our anger, we are siding with ignorance. At that point, we no longer see the arising of our thoughts, but only focus on protecting our wounded ego. The story of a father in Bin Duong is a very common example. He was the one who cared for his family, worked hard, and always hoped his children would excel in their studies, be obedient, and achieve success. But it was precisely this excessive expectation that became the root of his anger. Whenever his children made mistakes, performed poorly in school, or were slow, he would get frustrated. His words would become harsh. Sometimes it was just a few reprimands, but this repeated itself for many years. The family atmosphere gradually became tense. When he recognized that expectation, he didn't force himself to become gentle immediately. He simply practiced pausing. Each time he was about to say something harsh, he would pause for a few seconds, breathe, recognize the tension in his chest, and ask himself, what am I angry about? What am I hoping for? Just doing that, his words would slow down. His voice would become less sharp. Sometimes he would choose to say nothing at all. Gradually, the children sensed the change. They no longer felt constantly judged. They no longer feared coming home. The family atmosphere became lighter. Not because the children were more perfect, but because the father no longer let anger guide his words and actions. The family became more peaceful, not because of who won or lost, but because one person was willing to turn inward and reflect on their own thoughts. This story illustrates a very clear point. When we fail to recognize the underlying intention, we think we are teaching, but in reality, we are venting our anger. We think we are acting for the sake of others, but in fact, we are acting for the sake of our wounded ego. And when words carry anger, even if they are cloaked in love, they still create negative karma. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that the severity of karma does not lie in the form of the action, but in the mind behind that action. A word spoken out of anger leaves a very deep mark, both on the listener's mind and the speaker's. The listener suffers hurt, and the speaker carries the seed of anger that continues to grow. Only when we recognize the initial thought do we have the opportunity to stop before karma forms. Stopping here doesn't mean suppressing it, but rather not continuing to nurture it, not adding more stories to our minds, not adding more reasons to be angry. When the thought is not nurtured, it dissolves on its own. And when the thought dissolves, our words and actions also change direction. Those who practice according to the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng are not outwardly gentle all the time. Rather, they are deeply mindful inwardly, mindful enough to clearly see what thoughts are arising within themselves, and mindful enough to prevent those thoughts from leading them down the path of creating karma. This is a silent practice, but its effects are profound. Anger, if recognized early, is just a small wave. If not recognized, it will become a storm, and we are the ones who suffer the most long-term consequences. Reflecting on our thoughts each day won't make our lives perfect immediately, but it will certainly make our lives less painful, reduce family tension, and preserve more blessings over the years. 6. Anger quickly depletes blessings. According to the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, each outburst of anger is not just a momentary emotional reaction, but a moment when wisdom is obscured and blessings silently leak away. Blessings are not lost during major events, but are often gradually lost through instances when the mind fails to remain calm in the face of one's own emotions. Many people think blessings come from external sources, money, luck, opportunities. But according to ancient wisdom, blessings are first and foremost a state of inner peace. When the mind is at peace, words are gentle, actions are measured, and relationships naturally improve. When the mind is disturbed by anger, words are sharp, actions are hasty, and relationships are consequently damaged. Therefore, blessings are quickly diminished. Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that wisdom and merit are two inseparable aspects. When wisdom is clear, one knows when to stop. Merit is preserved accordingly. When anger arises, wisdom is immediately obscured. We no longer see the whole picture, nor hear the voice of conscience, but only the voice of a wounded ego. It is at that moment that merit begins to leak away. Anger often leads to many consequences. Words spoken in anger often go beyond what is necessary. Sometimes it's just one harsh word, but it hurts others for a long time. Sometimes it's just one uncontrolled reaction, but it ruins an entire relationship. These losses cannot be measured in money, but they represent a depletion of blessings in life. The danger is that people often don't realize their blessings are diminishing. We only see that we've vented our anger, that we've spoken our minds. But we don't see that after the anger subsides, our hearts feel heavier, relationships become colder, and the atmosphere around us becomes more tense. All of these are signs that our blessings are declining. But because it happens subtly, few people notice. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng once emphasized that those who maintain a calm mind in the face of adversity are deeply blessed. This isn't because they aren't offended, but because they don't let offense control their minds. When there is no anger, wisdom remains intact. When wisdom remains, one sees more paths than a spontaneous reaction. And it is these mindful choices that preserve much blessings for the future. There are people who work very hard and live virtuous lives, yet their lives are still full of hardships. According to ancient wisdom, the reason is not a lack of effort, but often lies in their restless minds, prone to anger, dissatisfaction, and comparison. These states cause whatever blessings they have accumulated to leak away like a leaky barrel. Much is poured in, but it cannot retain the blessings for long. Anger also depletes merit because it creates new karma. When we are angry, we sow the seeds of hatred in our hearts. These seeds don't disappear after the anger subsides. They remain there, waiting for the right conditions to sprout again. And each time they sprout, they become stronger. This repetition makes the mind increasingly prone to anger, and merit is thus lost in a long, unending chain. Those who understand the Dharma don't try to force themselves not to be angry. Instead, they learn to recognize anger earlier, as soon as the thought of annoyance arises. They stop, breathe slowly, don't speak, don't react. It is precisely that moment of stopping that is when merit is preserved, because wisdom is not yet completely obscured. And as long as wisdom remains, we will not do things that we will regret later. Someone asked why silence is considered preserving merit. It's because much negative karma is created through words. Words spoken in anger often carry destructive energy. They hurt others and also hurt oneself. When we remain silent at the right time, we stop the chain of creating negative karma and also stop the leakage of merit that is occurring. Preserving merit isn't about doing something grand, but about avoiding things that deplete it. Anger is the most common cause. Those with deep merit aren't usually the ones who win many arguments, but rather the ones who avoid many unnecessary ones. They understand that winning a verbal battle cannot compensate for the long-term loss in their hearts and relationships. Over time, those who manage to avoid anger will find their lives lighter, their work smoother, and their relationships stronger. This isn't because they're luckier than others, but because they don't destroy their own blessings. Each time they refrain from anger, they preserve their blessings. Each time they stop themselves before an outburst, their wisdom grows. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach people to avoid emotions. Instead, he taught them to look directly at emotions with the light of awakened awareness. When anger is illuminated, it no longer has the power to control. And when we are not controlled, we naturally live differently, lighter, slower, and we create less karma. Merit is therefore accumulated naturally and sustainably. If you frequently find yourself regretting your actions after each outburst of anger, if you feel relationships drifting apart unintentionally, it could be a sign that blessings are leaking through unreflected anger. Reflecting on your own reactions is the first step in retaining blessings for yourself and those around you. If you find these insights helpful in understanding anger and your blessings, please subscribe to the Simple Philosophy channel. Share this video with your friends and family so we can all learn together how to master anger, maintain clear wisdom, and preserve lasting blessings for years to come. 7. People who are easily angered often don't understand why their lives are full of conflicts. They feel like there are always people around them who disagree with them. Their work is always problematic. Relationships are easily strained. Family life is difficult. But if we look deeply into the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, most of these conflicts don't begin with external circumstances, but rather with the anger within themselves. Anger is like a thin wisp of smoke. When it first arises, no one sees it, but it quickly spreads, obscuring both the angry person and those around them. When the mind is clouded, we look at others with suspicion, listen to words with defensive ears, and react with an agitated ego. It is at that moment that conflict begins to develop. An angry person often thinks they are only reacting to circumstances. They get angry when someone says something wrong, or when things don't go their way. But in reality, circumstances are just an excuse. If one's mind is calm enough, the same words, the same situation, might not provoke anger in others. This shows that the root cause lies not in the circumstances, but in the mind. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng once emphasized that when the mind is agitated, the environment also moves. An angry person encounters obstacles wherever they go. Not because there are more obstacles, but because their mind is always in a state of readiness to confront them. It's like someone carrying sharp thorns in their hand. Wherever they touch, they hurt others and themselves. Anger doesn't just create a conflict. It leaves behind lingering effects. After the anger subsides, the mind remains tense. Words become sharper and attitudes colder. The other person senses this energy and reacts accordingly. Thus, conflict follows conflict. Those involved become even more convinced that their lives are full of conflict, failing to see that the root cause remains an unexamined anger. In the family, those who are quick-tempered often complain that they are not understood, but they fail to see that it is their anger that prevents others from opening up. In the workplace, those who are quick-tempered often think they are being opposed, but in reality, their reactions make others defensive. In society, those who are quick-tempered often encounter conflict, but most of this conflict stems from their own lack of tactful responses. According to ancient wisdom, conflict itself is not frightening. What is frightening is not seeing one's own part in that conflict. When we only blame circumstances, we lose the opportunity for transformation. When we dare to look back at our anger, we begin to change our course. Just one person reducing their anger can change the entire relationship and lighten the atmosphere. Those who understand the way don't try to correct others first. They turn inward to correct their own hearts. When their hearts are calm, they speak more slowly, listen more carefully, and don't react immediately. This very slowness cuts off many conflicts from the very beginning. Not because they are submissive, but because they see no need to clash with everything. When a person stops carrying their anger around, they'll be surprised to find their life naturally becomes more peaceful. Fewer arguments, fewer misunderstandings. Not because others change, but because they are no longer the trigger. Conflict requires two sides. When one side stops, the waves subside. Eight, anger doesn't usually manifest most intensely towards strangers. Strangely enough, it's strongest with those closest to us, those we trust to understand us, tolerate us, and never abandon us. That very sense of security inadvertently becomes fertile ground for anger to flourish. With strangers, we are usually cautious, mindful of our words, and restrain our emotions. But with loved ones, we easily let go, speak frankly, vent our frustrations, and let our emotions guide us. Because deep down, we believe they won't leave. They will understand us. They will tolerate us. And that very belief, when not illuminated, turns into a subtle form of indifference. Many people don't realize that anger towards loved ones often doesn't stem from big issues, but from very small things. A forgotten promise, a delay, a superficial answer, an inconsiderate action. These things might be overlooked by strangers, but with loved ones, they hurt more deeply because we expect more. When expectations aren't met, the first feeling isn't anger. It's sadness, disappointment, and a feeling of not being valued. But if you don't recognize this underlying emotion, it's easy to jump straight to anger and use that anger to mask your own sadness. In close relationships, anger often carries an unspoken belief that the other person should understand without being told, remember what one expects, and behave according to one's expectations. When this belief is not met, one not only feels disappointed, but also betrayed. And from there, anger erupts very quickly. The story of a woman in Da Nang is a typical example. She frequently got angry with her husband over seemingly minor things, forgetting promises, coming home later than planned, ignoring what she had said. Each time this happened, her anger flared up intensely. Her words became sharp, and the family atmosphere became tense. Initially, she thought she was angry because her husband was inconsiderate, because he broke his promises, because he wasn't responsible enough. But after calming down and no longer being angry, she realized something else. What hurt her most wasn't the broken promise, but the feeling of being unimportant in his eyes. Realizing that was a huge step, because when you see the true emotions behind the anger, you have a chance to address the root cause. If you only blame, only lash out, only accuse, the anger will repeat itself. But when she started learning to express her needs calmly, everything changed. Instead of exploding when her husband forgets, she chooses a moment of calm. She says she needs to be valued, remembered, and feels she has a place in his heart. Not through reproach, but through clear sharing. When needs are expressed in the right way, anger no longer needs to surface to speak for them. This reveals an important truth. Anger towards loved ones is often the cry of an unmet need. When we don't know how to express it, we use anger to force attention. But that only creates fear, distance, and hurt. Family members don't always understand what we're thinking. They don't always guess our expectations correctly. When we assume they should understand, remember, and know everything on their own, we're placing an invisible burden on them. And when that burden isn't fully borne, we get angry. But in reality, we're angry because our expectations weren't met. Anger within the family is therefore very dangerous. It's not as loud as in society, but it erodes slowly. Each outburst of anger erodes trust. Each uncontrolled word leaves a scratch on the relationship. Small scratches, if left unhealed, will accumulate into a crack. Many people later look back and regret having been too harsh with their loved ones, venting their anger unnecessarily and hurting those who love them most. But when you're angry, it's hard to see that, because anger always believes itself to be right. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that if the mind is not awakened, what is near becomes distant. A person may not be angry with the world, but may be angry with those in their own family. This is not because those in their family are worse, but because they have relaxed their mindfulness towards them. They forget that they too are human beings with their own limitations. When we begin to bring mindfulness back into our close relationships, we will see many things differently. We will see that the other person doesn't intentionally hurt us. We will see that sometimes they forget not because they don't love us, but because they are busy, because they have different ways of thinking, or because they don't recognize our importance as we expect. People who know how to manage their anger with loved ones often have more harmonious families. Not because there are no problems, but because the problems are addressed when they are small, before they escalate into major conflicts, before anger builds up into resentment. The anger subsided, not because the other person changed immediately, but because I myself changed my perspective. I changed my reaction. When I no longer believed that others had to put up with me, I no longer allowed myself to hurt them with irrational emotions. The family is the easiest place to create negative karma, but it's also the easiest place to practice spiritual cultivation. Just pause for a moment each time you're angry. Ask yourself what within you is hurting, what you're lacking, what you're longing for. You've already taken a significant step on the path of transformation. If you find yourself getting angrier with loved ones than with strangers, it's not because you're a bad person. It's because you haven't learned to listen to your true feelings. When you start listening, anger won't need to be expressed through shouting to get attention. If you want to learn how to look deeply into your emotions, to reduce anger, to hurt your loved ones less, and to keep your family more peaceful every day, subscribe to the Simple Philosophy channel. Let's learn together how to master our minds in the most familiar aspects of life. 9. According to the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, anger is not just an emotion. Anger is a very clear manifestation of ignorance. Ignorance here is not stupidity, but rather a failure to see the true nature of life, to see impermanence, and to accept that things do not operate according to one's own will. When a person gets angry, what's happening in their mind isn't just frustration. It's a clash between reality and expectations. Reality goes one way, expectations go another. The moment these two things don't meet, the mind reacts. And that reaction is often called anger. Those who understand impermanence will be less angry, not because they don't encounter adversity, but because they know that everything is constantly changing. Words spoken today may differ from those spoken tomorrow. People's feelings may be different now than they are now. Current circumstances will eventually pass. When they see this, their attachment lessens. And when their attachment lessens, anger is less likely to arise. Conversely, when we don't see impermanence, we easily believe that everything must be stable the way we want it to be. People must behave exactly as we expect. Work must flow smoothly according to plan. Life must be favorable if we have tried hard enough. When reality doesn't meet these beliefs, we don't accept it. And from that refusal, anger arises. We get angry because others change. We get angry because circumstances reverse. We get angry because life isn't as fair as we thought. But if we look deeper, we'll see that the root of anger doesn't lie in the person or the situation, but in the attachment in our minds, attachment to a rigid image of how life should operate. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng once emphasized that as long as the mind is attached, suffering cannot end. Attachment to right and wrong, attachment to winning and losing, attachment to the need to be respected, to be reciprocated, to be recognized. These are the very grounds that nurture ignorance. Ignorance makes us forget that no one is born to please us. No circumstance is obligated to conform to our personal desires. Each person carries their own karma, their own suffering, their own perspective. When we demand that they conform to our expectations, we are forgetting this fundamental truth. Anger, therefore, often takes on the color of the ego that is hurt, the ego that is not satisfied, the ego that feels disregarded. When the ego speaks, intellect retreats, and in that moment, ignorance leads the way. A person who views life through the lens of impermanence will understand that everything comes and goes. Today's praise may be tomorrow's criticism. Today's success may be tomorrow's challenge. The person you love today may be indifferent at another time, not because they are bad people, but because they too are changing in the flow of life. When we understand this, we no longer place all our happiness in external stability. We know that the only thing we can rely on in the long term is inner awareness. When the mind is clear enough, even turbulent circumstances will hardly shake us. Angry people often fail to realize that they are resisting impermanence. They want to keep things the same, to have others remain unchanged, to have circumstances remain constant, to have life follow a familiar script. But life never stands still. And it is this resistance that creates suffering. Anger is also a sign of not accepting imperfection. It's a refusal to accept that life is full of flaws, that people make mistakes, and that we ourselves have our weaknesses. When we don't allow imperfection to exist, we become angry whenever it arises. And life is full of imperfections. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach to avoid emotions. He taught to look directly at their root. When anger arises, if we only try to suppress it, it will accumulate. If we give in, it will explode. Only when we realize that anger comes from attachment can we release it? The solution isn't through logic, but through experience, through self-observation. Every time you get angry, ask yourself what you're clinging to. An expectation, an image of yourself, a notion of right and wrong. When you see that clearly, the anger will naturally subside. Those who learn the lesson of impermanence will gradually become less angry. Not because life becomes gentler, but because their hearts become softer. Softness is not weakness, but flexibility. Knowing how to adapt to circumstances, knowing how to adjust instead of resisting. When we accept that life doesn't always go our way, we're no longer shocked when things don't go as planned. We're no longer angry when others behave differently than expected. We know that the only thing we can adjust is how we react. Accepting impermanence doesn't make us passive. On the contrary, it helps us act more mindfully, without placing too much emotion on the outcome, and without equating self-worth with success or failure. When we can do that, our minds become lighter, anger decreases, and life's path becomes less bumpy. We get angry because we don't see impermanence. But once we see it, we'll understand that nothing is worth holding on to forever. No anger needs to be carried around for a lifetime. All emotions come and go, like clouds passing across the sky. Those who understand impermanence will not harbor anger, because they know that holding on to anger is holding on to something that will inevitably dissipate. But before it dissipates, it will burn away many blessings, many relationships, and much inner peace. Understanding impermanence is a major step on the path to liberation from ignorance. When ignorance diminishes, anger also diminishes. No need to force it. No need to try. Just see clearly. See deeply enough. See for long enough. And then, anger is no longer a guide, but merely a signal, reminding us to turn inward, to live more slowly, more gently, and more in harmony with life. 10. Many people, when trying to calm their anger, often resort to superficial methods. Counting in their heads, deep breathing, or remaining silent to avoid outbursts. These methods provide temporary relief, preventing anger from erupting immediately. However, very few realize that if their perspective on life doesn't change, the anger will only subside temporarily and return in a different form. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach people to suppress their emotions, nor did he encourage suppressing anger through willpower, because what is suppressed will eventually find a way out. And when it is released, it is often stronger than it was initially. To truly reduce anger isn't about learning to be more tolerant, but about learning to see life differently. When your perspective changes, your emotions will naturally change as well. No need to force it. No need to suppress it. Much of our anger stems from the belief that life should operate according to our logic, that others should understand us, behave correctly, show respect, keep promises, and fulfill their roles properly. When reality doesn't unfold that way, the mind reacts, and that reaction manifests as anger. If we only count when we're angry, we're only dealing with the symptoms. A fire may be temporarily extinguished, but the fuel remains. Just a small spark is all it takes for the anger to flare up again, perhaps even stronger because it's been suppressed. Changing your perspective on life means changing your understanding of people. Understanding that everyone has limits. Everyone gets tired sometimes. Everyone has their own worries. No one is always clear-headed enough to behave exactly as others expect. When you realize this, you demand less. And when you demand less, you get less angry. Many people get angry not because of big issues, but because of very small things. An insensitive remark, a delayed action, a seemingly unintentional oversight. But the root of anger doesn't lie in the event itself, but in how we interpret that event in our minds. If we think, they did that because they looked down on me, the anger will be immense. If we think, maybe they're busy, tired, or confused, the anger will subside. The situation remains the same, but the perspective changes. The emotional outcome is completely different. Changing your perspective on life also means accepting that not everything happens for a clear reason. Not every action is directed at you. Sometimes, others are just struggling with their own lives, with no intention of hurting anyone. When we stop putting ourselves at the center of everything, we are less affected. And when we are less affected, we are less angry. Anger also stems from the belief that if we remain silent, we will suffer. If we don't react, we will be overwhelmed. But in reality, most outbursts of anger only cause us to lose more. Our image, our reputation, our relationships, our blessings. Meanwhile, what we want to protect remains unprotected. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that when the mind is clear, there is no need to use force. People who are not easily angered are not weak, but have a broader perspective. They know that a rash reaction may satisfy the ego for a few seconds, but it leaves long-lasting consequences. Changing your perspective on life also means understanding that not everything needs an immediate response. Not every word needs a reply. There are things that, if left to time to resolve, will naturally fall apart. If you react hastily, it will only escalate into a bigger problem. People who are easily angered often live very stressful lives. This is because they are always on guard, waiting for something unpleasant to happen so they can react. Meanwhile, people who change their perspective live more lightly. They don't have overly high expectations. They don't attach too much meaning to every small action. Therefore, their minds are less turbulent. To lessen anger, one needs to view life like a flowing stream. Not every stone needs to be picked up. Not every collision is a challenge. Some things should simply be let go. They will leave no trace. When we understand that life has no obligation to please us, we stop being angry with life. When we understand that others are not obligated to understand us completely, we stop being angry with them. When we understand that we ourselves are full of shortcomings, we stop being angry with ourselves. Changing your perspective on life doesn't happen in a day. It's a process of observation, experience, and reflection. Every time you get angry, it's an opportunity to re-examine what you're clinging to, what you're expecting, and what you're afraid of losing. When we clearly see these things, anger is no longer the enemy. It becomes a guide, showing us where attachment and ignorance still remain in our minds. I want to reduce anger, not to become emotionless, but to become someone who understands emotions. To understand them so I won't be dragged down by them. To understand them so I won't live my whole life in weariness and conflict. And when our perspective on life changes, anger is no longer a familiar reflex. It becomes just a fleeting phenomenon. It comes and goes, leaving no trace, diminishing our blessings, and hurting those we love most. 11. Many people think that anger stems from a sudden outburst of emotion. But a deeper look reveals that behind anger, there is almost always a very strong need, the need for control. Control over people, control over situations, control over outcomes. When things don't go as planned, the mind becomes restless. And that restlessness quickly turns into anger. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng once pointed out that the root of suffering does not lie in circumstances, but in attachment. The more attachment there is, the stronger the desire to control. And when control fails, anger arises as a self-defense reflex of the ego. Anger isn't just about being angry at others. It's the mind's resistance to losing control. We get angry when others don't listen. We get angry when things go off track. We get angry when we feel disregarded. It all revolves around one point. We want everything within our grasp. Many people live their entire lives in a state of tension without realizing it. This is because they are always trying to hold on tight, to maintain their image, to maintain their position, to maintain their perceived righteousness, to maintain their role in the eyes of others. When anything is shaken, anger immediately arises to protect what they are holding on to. But life is not something that can be completely controlled. Even less so can people. Each person has their own pace of life, their own perceptions, their own limits. When we try to force others to conform to our own mold, conflict is inevitable. Letting go of control doesn't mean giving up. It's not about ignoring things. It's about understanding that there are things you can only influence, not control. When you recognize this, your mind begins to lighten. And when your mind lightens, anger naturally weakens. People who are easily angered are often very tired. They have to both deal with the situation and keep things within their boundaries. Just a small disruption, and the entire control system collapses. Anger erupts as the last resort to regain control. The story of the man in Guanggai is a prime example. He was capable and quick-witted in business, but known for his hot temper. In his work, he was accustomed to making quick decisions, speaking quickly, and wanting everything to go his way. When partners were slow, hesitant, or had different opinions, he would easily snap, interrupt, and impose his will. Initially, people tolerated him because he was skilled. But gradually, business relationships began to crumble. Partners withdrew, not because of profit, but because they couldn't withstand the psychological pressure. He lost many opportunities without understanding why. It wasn't until a friend frankly told him, "You're not wrong, but you want everything your way too much," that he began to reflect. Not to blame himself, but to clearly see the root of his anger. He realized that every time he got angry, he felt like he was losing control, losing his power, losing his position. And to regain that feeling, he used anger as a tool. But this tool was destroying the very things he wanted to preserve. From then on, he began to listen more. He didn't rush to respond. He didn't interrupt others. When there was a differing opinion, he didn't immediately refute it, but let the other person finish speaking. It was difficult at first, because he was still seething inside. But he realized one thing. When you don't react immediately, anger usually subsides on its own. When he doesn't try to control the conversation, it becomes more relaxed. The other person feels respected. There's no more defensiveness. New relationships gradually form. Some old acquaintances even rekindle. His anger subsided, not because he was trying to suppress it, but because he was no longer so fixated on being right, fast, and doing things his way. He learned to believe that everyone has their own reasons for their pace. It's the same within families. Anger often flares up when we want to control our loved ones. We want our children to obey us. We want our spouses to understand us. We want everything to go exactly as expected. But the more we try to control, the greater the distance becomes, and the more anger there is. Letting go of control means accepting that others have different rights, different ways of thinking, and different paths. When we accept this, we no longer see differences as a threat. And when there is no longer a threat, anger has no place to stand. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that the greatest freedom is not controlling others, but being free from the constraints of one's own mind. When we are no longer controlled by the fear of losing control, the mind naturally finds peace. And in a peaceful mind, anger cannot last long. Letting go of control also means letting go of the ego. Letting go of the thought that if things don't go your way, then it's wrong. When the ego softens, we become more empathetic. And empathy is the most powerful medicine to dispel anger. Those who know when to let go are not weak. They are wise enough to understand that not every battle needs to be won. Not every victory or defeat is necessary. Sometimes, taking a step back isn't out of fear, but because you see the bigger picture. When we let go of control, we no longer have to strain to maintain an image. We no longer have to react to prove ourselves. Our minds become more open. And in that openness, anger is just a small ripple, no longer powerful enough to sweep us away. Anger, in the end, is not the enemy. It's just a sign that we're holding on too tightly to something. When we learn to let go, what we fear losing often doesn't, and what we least expect gently returns. 12. Many people think they don't get angry easily because they rarely raise their voices. They rarely have outbursts. They rarely argue. But the Sixth Patriarch Huineng looked deeper and saw another form of anger that was even more dangerous. That was anger that accumulated in silence, repressed anger. Anger that was not illuminated. Over time, it turned into resentment. Resentment is not loud. It doesn't manifest immediately. But resentment silently gnaws at the heart. It makes people cold, distant, and withdrawn. And once resentment has formed, even the slightest conflict can cause everything to erupt violently. Many people endure with the thought, just bear with it. Bear with it to maintain peace. Bear with it to avoid trouble. But enduring without mindfulness, without understanding one's own emotions, without seeing the root of dissatisfaction, will not create blessings. It will only accumulate resentment. Enduring suffering without understanding why. Enduring out of fear of losing relationships. Enduring out of fear of being judged. Enduring out of fear of speaking the truth. All of these things leave scars on the heart. And those scars are the seeds of resentment. Resentment differs from anger in that anger can flare up and then subside. Resentment, however, lingers. It changes the way we see others. We no longer see them as before. We are more prone to misinterpreting, more likely to attribute negative thoughts, and more prone to defensiveness, even though outwardly everything seems normal. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that if the mind is not illuminated, darkness will naturally arise. Enduring ignorance only allows that darkness to grow. Initially, it's just discomfort. Then comes disappointment. Then it turns into silent reproach. And finally, resentment. Many families break apart, not because of big arguments, but because of prolonged periods of suppressed resentment. Spouses no longer speak honestly to each other. Parents no longer listen to their children. Each person harbors a burden of bitterness inside. No one knows, no one touches. But everyone is exhausted. Resentment robs people of their ability to empathize. When resentment is present, we no longer see things for what they are, but through layers of old wounds. A seemingly ordinary remark is interpreted as sarcasm. An unintentional action is understood as contempt. The danger is that those who harbor resentment often think they are right because they have suffered too much. But they forget that suffering without mindfulness is not a sacrifice, but rather self-harm. Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not encourage suppression. He taught contemplation. Contemplation to clearly see the emotions that are arising, to see clearly what is causing sadness, pain, or fear. When one sees clearly, the mind has the opportunity for liberation. Many people are afraid to confront their true feelings, thinking that speaking them out will only complicate things further. But in reality, what complicates things is the buried emotion. When left unnamed, it will find its way out, often through belated anger. Resentment is also a form of repressed control. We endure because we don't get what we want. We don't feel respected. We don't feel recognized. But instead of speaking out rationally, we hold it in. We hope others will understand on their own. When they don't understand, resentment arises. A person who endures for too long often loses their boundaries. They no longer know how much they can tolerate. When those boundaries are blurred, any transgression becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back. And at that point, anger erupts so intensely that they don't even recognize themselves. Accumulated anger also makes the body tired. A heavy mind leads to a heavy body. Sleep is restless. Appetite is poor. People easily become irritable over small things. But those who harbor resentment often don't realize it. They think they're just tired, just stressed, just due to circumstances. Actually, the mind is burdened with too many unresolved issues. Every time I suppress my feelings, I'm lying to myself saying, it's okay. But the mind isn't fooled. It remembers everything. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that mindfulness is not about not being angry, but about clearly seeing when anger arises. Similarly, mindfulness is not about not enduring, but about knowing why you are enduring, and whether that endurance stems from wisdom or from fear. Mindful endurance is knowing when to endure. This is worth being patient for the long-term benefit, for true love. And while enduring, the mind harbors no resentment, no record of wrongdoing, no expectation of retribution. Enduring ignorance means bearing resentment, hoping for compensation, and expecting others to understand. But when hope is dashed, resentment arises like a debt. Letting go of resentment isn't easy. Resentment makes us feel like victims. And that feeling sometimes helps us avoid taking responsibility for our emotions. But the Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that no one can make our hearts suffer unless we allow it. Looking back, we'll see that much of our resentment isn't because others are bad, but because we don't dare to be true to our own needs, don't dare to speak up, don't dare to set boundaries, and then we blame others for not understanding. Liberation from resentment begins with being honest with yourself. Be honest that you are tired, you are sad, you are hurt. No blaming, no suppressing, simply acknowledging. When you see it, resentment begins to dissipate, because resentment thrives on ignorance. When the light of awakening shines upon it, it has nowhere to hide. Accumulated anger is a very clear reminder that we have neglected ourselves for too long. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach people to endure suffering by gritting their teeth. He taught them to turn inward and examine their own hearts, so they would no longer suffer in a way that wears them down. When we know when to stop, when we know how to speak calmly, and when we know how to take care of our emotions, we don't need to get angry or hold grudges for long. When the mind is clear, the karmic stream of anger naturally weakens. And when resentment is gone, people become light again. Light in their gaze, light in their words, light in their way of life. This is not because life is less difficult, but because the heart no longer accumulates darkness. 13. Most people only pay attention to anger when it has already erupted into words or actions. But according to the spirit of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, anger does not begin in the mouth, nor does it begin in the hands. It begins very early in the body. The body always senses the mind first. Before we can even name an emotion, the body speaks. Breathing becomes rapid. Chest tightens. Shoulders hunched. Teeth clenched. Hands clenched. This is no coincidence. It's a very clear signal that the mind is leaving a state of peace. People who aren't used to listening attentively often ignore these signs. They keep talking. They keep reacting. They keep explaining until their anger gets out of control. At that point, any reminders are too late. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that mindfulness is not just understanding with the mind, but seeing with the whole body and mind. The body is the early warning bell. If we know how to listen, we can stop before karma forms. Breath is the first signal. When the mind is at peace, breathing is natural, deep, and gentle. When dissatisfaction arises, breathing immediately changes. It becomes shorter, more rapid, and irregular. Many people don't realize it, but the body is being very honest. Chest tightness is the next sign. It feels like something is stuck inside, unable to escape. That's when emotions are repressed, when the ego is hurt, when desires aren't fulfilled. If you know when to stop, just a few slow breaths, the anger can dissipate by half. Clenched hands are an expression of the need for control. When the body doesn't grasp a situation, it reacts by clenching its fists, as if wanting to hold on tightly, wanting to force everything to go its way. Recognizing clenched hands means recognizing that the mind wants to win. Many people learn to control their emotions through willpower, but willpower often comes too late. When the body is tense, when breathing is rapid, when words are ready to be uttered, That method is very energy-consuming and prone to failure. Listening to your body is the easier path, because your body signals very early. You just need to be familiar enough to recognize it. A moment of pause, before speaking, before sending a message, before reacting, can change the course of an entire situation. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach to run away from emotions. He taught to look straight ahead, and the body is the most honest place to see. The mind can deceive itself, but the body cannot. Many people say, "I'm not angry," but their bodies are always tense. Their shoulders are always strained. Their breathing is always shallow. That's a sign of building anger. The anger hasn't erupted yet, but it's silently present. When we learn to listen to our bodies, we begin to understand ourselves better. We understand that every time we feel uncomfortable, every time we feel frustrated, our bodies react. And if we don't take care of ourselves, our bodies will suffer the consequences. Prolonged anger exhausts the body. Muscles become stiff. The head feels heavy. Neck and shoulder pain easily occurs. Insomnia is common, but people often blame age, work, or circumstances. Few realize that the body is carrying too many unresolved emotions. Listening to your body isn't a complicated technique. Just pause for a few seconds. Silently ask yourself, how is my breathing? Is my chest tense? Are my hands clenching? If the answer is yes, then it's time to be silent. Silence at this moment isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about protection, protecting happiness, protecting wisdom, protecting relationships. Many regrettable things in life happen simply because we didn't pause to take a single breath. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng once emphasized that when the mind is agitated, the environment becomes chaotic. But before the environment becomes chaotic, the body is already agitated. The body is the first gateway to awakening. When we learn to listen to our inner selves, anger no longer comes unexpectedly. We sense it from afar, like seeing dark clouds gathering. And once we see it, we have the right not to step further into the storm. Gradually, as this habit is cultivated, the body becomes more supple. Breathing becomes deeper. Reactions slow down. Not because we are weak, but because we are alert. Those who know how to listen to their bodies rarely regret their words. This is because they seldom speak when their bodies are tense. They choose to speak when their bodies are calm, when their minds are clear, and their words at that time are usually constructive. Listening to your body is also a way to return to the present moment. When you pay attention to your breath, to your sensations, you are no longer so swept away by thoughts. Anger needs thought to grow. When thinking stops, anger loses its power. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach that anger can be overcome by coercion. He taught that one should see it clearly, and the body is the clearest mirror to see it. Each time we notice our rapid breathing, chest tightness, clenched hands, and know when to stop, we are cutting a small severance of karma. It may seem insignificant, but it accumulates enough to change our future. Maintaining a peaceful breath even when anger is imminent, that is spiritual practice, and practice it this way. You don't need to go to the mountains. You don't need to distance yourself from the world. You just need to be mindful enough to listen to what your body is telling you. 14. The wisdom in the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng does not lie in extinguishing a large fire. Rather, it lies in the ability to prevent the fire from spreading in the first place. Before anger can even form, before a single thought of dissatisfaction arises, knowing when to stop it, that is true profound wisdom. Most people wait until anger has flared up before trying to control it. Once the words have been spoken, once the action has occurred, once the hurt has been caused. At that point, even with apologies and regrets, the karma has already been sown. Stopping early means stopping before karma takes hold, before words become venomous, before actions become destructive, before the ego is wounded and turns into a reaction. This is not easy. but it is something that can be cultivated. Sixth Patriarch Huineng clearly saw the progression of anger. It doesn't appear suddenly. It develops step by step. A thought of dissatisfaction, a feeling of being disregarded, an unfulfilled desire. Without wisdom, these small sparks will meet the wind and flare up. People who don't have the habit of stopping early often console themselves with the thought, "I was just saying it to vent my anger. I was just reacting because I was so angry." But in reality, each time they do this, they are allowing the fire to burn deeper into their psychological habits. Stopping early is not suppression. Suppression is trying to force a fire to start when it's already burning. Stopping early means seeing the spark and not adding more fuel. It means recognizing that the mind is beginning to stray and turning back immediately. In daily life, stopping early could mean not replying to a message when you're angry, not arguing when your voice starts to raise, not explaining when your chest is tight. These are very small actions, but they can save a lot of big problems. Wise people don't wait until they've won or lost to stop. They stop before they've won anything, because they understand that winning in anger often leads to losing in the long run. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that a single thought can lead one astray from the path. But if one immediately recognizes that thought, the path will manifest itself. Stopping early is the very moment of returning. Many people think, "I must react quickly to avoid being taken advantage of." But in reality, reacting quickly in anger often creates long-term damage. Stopping early, even if it seems like a temporary loss, actually preserves good fortune in the long run. Stopping early is also an expression of compassion for oneself. Because anger not only harms others, it also depletes our own body and mind. Every time we get angry, our body becomes tense, our mind is disturbed, our intellect is clouded, and our blessings are diminished. Those who know when to stop tend to live longer. Not because they avoid all difficulties, but because they don't let difficulties become a fire that burns them from within. In a family, stopping early helps maintain harmony. A moment of slowing down, a well-timed silence, can prevent cracks that last for years. Many families break apart simply because no one is willing to stop early. In the workplace, stopping early helps maintain credibility. A rash word can ruin a relationship built over decades. An ill-considered reaction can cause others to lose trust. Once credibility is lost, it's very difficult to regain. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not encourage weakness. He spoke of self-mastery. A strong person is one who can control their mind, not one who is led astray by emotions. Stopping early is also a way of looking ahead. When we see the consequences of anger, we are no longer tempted by it for the fleeting feeling of satisfaction. We choose long-term peace over short-term pleasure. Many people say, "I know anger is bad, but I still can't stop it." The problem isn't knowing, but realizing it early enough. When it's too late, knowing is useless. Therefore, practicing stopping early isn't about practicing it during moments of intense anger, but rather during very minor annoyances, mild frustrations, and fleeting dissatisfactions. If we ignore them, we're building up fire. Each time we recognize an unpleasant thought and don't nurture it further, we extinguish a spark. Gradually, the fire has fewer opportunities to reignite. People who habitually stop early are often perceived by others as mature, calm, and trustworthy. Not because they lack emotions, but because they don't let emotions control them. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng had a profound understanding of life. He knew that people don't suffer because of circumstances, but because of their reactions. Stopping early means breaking that chain of reactions. When we stop early, the mind has a chance to return to a state of observation. At that moment, wisdom emerges. We begin to see that this is not something to be angry about. The other person didn't do it intentionally. Or even if they did, anger wouldn't help. Stopping early doesn't mean we lose our right to speak. It just helps us choose the right time and way to speak without creating negative karma. Speaking calmly is completely different from speaking angrily. Many people spend their entire lives practicing spiritual discipline. But if they learn just one thing, their future will be different. Because most of the negative karma in life arises from moments when they fail to stop it in time. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that the mind is like the earth. If you sow seeds of anger, you will reap suffering. But if you don't sow from the beginning, the earth will naturally become calm. Stopping early means not sowing, not planting, not nurturing, not adding. It sounds simple, but doing it requires wisdom. When you find yourself starting to tense up, starting to feel uncomfortable, starting to want to react, and you choose to stop, choose to breathe, choose to be silent. In that moment, you are protecting your well-being, a lifetime. You don't need to put out too many big fires. Just learn to prevent fires from starting. That's enough to live peacefully, live lightly, and live sustainably. 15. Many people embark on the path of spiritual practice with a strong desire to eradicate anger. They view anger as an enemy, as something evil that needs to be eliminated as quickly as possible. But according to the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, this perspective is precisely the reason why anger persists. Anger is not something to be destroyed, because anything destroyed by inner violence leaves behind aftershocks. The more we hate anger, the angrier we become. The more we try to suppress it, the more it will find a way to manifest itself in another form. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that the mind is inherently bright. Afflictions are merely guests. Guests come and go. If the host is clear-minded, the guests cannot stay long. Understanding anger is becoming a clear-minded host, not someone chasing after guests. Anger doesn't arise to harm you. It arises to signal that there's something inside that's not understood. An unacknowledged need, an unhealed wound, an expectation that hasn't been let go of. When we only focus on suppressing anger, we ignore the message it carries. It's like smashing a clock because you hate the sound of the chime. But time still passes. Understanding anger means turning inward and asking yourself, what am I angry about? What am I protecting? What am I afraid of losing? When these questions are asked mindfully, anger begins to transform. Many acts of anger are actually fears in disguise. Fear of not being recognized. Fear of abandonment. Fear of losing control. When we don't dare to confront our fears, we use anger to mask them. Some anger stems from exhaustion. The body is overloaded. The mind has no energy left, but we mistakenly think we're angry at someone else. Once we understand this, we just need to rest. The anger will dissipate on its own. There are also anger that stem from old wounds. A word spoken today touches upon a painful memory from years ago, but we mistakenly think we are angry in the present. When we see this overlap, we no longer blame the wrong person. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng did not teach avoiding emotions. He taught looking directly, looking without judgment, looking without identification. When we say, this is anger, it's not me, a gap in wisdom immediately appears. That distance weakens the anger, because it's no longer nourished by identification. We no longer say, I'm hot-tempered, I'm easily angered. We just see, anger is present in my heart. Just a small change in perspective. But the consequences are huge. Because when anger ceases to be an expression of the ego, it loses its control. Those who don't understand anger often fear it, or feel ashamed of it, or blame themselves for it. But all those reactions only add fuel to the fire, because they carry with them resistance. Those who understand anger are different. They don't rush to fix it. They don't rush to suppress it. They don't rush to justify it. They just observe. They observe with gentle curiosity. And it is that gentleness that softens the anger. Like a child crying because they haven't been listened to. When they are sat down, looked in the eye, and asked questions, they gradually stop crying. No yelling, no coercion. The same goes for anger within us. It needs to be understood. It doesn't need to be destroyed. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that afflictions are enlightenment. Not because afflictions are good, but because if one sees their true nature, afflictions are the gateway to wisdom. When we understand why we are angry, we understand a great deal about ourselves. We understand how we react. We understand our blind spots. We understand the things we still cling to. That is wisdom. Each outburst of anger, when fully understood, is a layer of ignorance being removed. And when ignorance diminishes, anger has no place to thrive. Experienced people will find that, after living with this understanding for a while, anger doesn't disappear completely, but it comes less intensely, goes away faster, and no longer has the same power as before. Anger still comes around sometimes, but it no longer leads to sharp words, no more impulsive actions, no more irreparable consequences. It's not because we're better at controlling things. It's because we understand things more deeply. Understanding makes anger subside. There's no need to fight. There's no need to worry about winning or losing. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng pointed out that when the mind is clear, all darkness will naturally dissipate. There is no need to sweep away the darkness. Just turn on the light. Anger is the shadow. Understanding is the lamp. Those who take this path live more easily, because they no longer have to strain themselves to be good people, no longer have to pretend not to be angry. They are simply people who see clearly. And when you see clearly, your mind will adjust itself. A lifetime doesn't need to be free from anger. Just understand each anger as it arises. In this way, karma doesn't accumulate, blessings don't diminish, and the mind gradually finds peace. Anger doesn't need to be destroyed, because it's not an enemy. It's a messenger. Once the letter is read, the messenger leaves on its own. Understanding this, people emerge from years of internal conflict and begin to live in reconciliation with themselves. 16. According to the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, transforming karma is not about doing something grand external, but begins with a very small change within. That is the gap between anger and action. Those who are not yet enlightened speak when anger arises and act when anger sets in. The moment the thought arises, the mouth opens. The moment the mind stirs, the body reacts. There is no room for pause. There is no choice. Therefore, karma continues endlessly. The person begins to awaken. It's not that they're no longer angry, but rather that they recognize the anger, but don't rush to act. They just need to slow down a beat. Karma has begun to change direction. This gap is initially very short, sometimes just a breath, a pause, a swallow. But it is that small moment that makes a huge difference. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that when the mind is not yet enlightened, every thought that arises becomes action. When the mind is enlightened, every thought that arises is merely a thought. It does not necessarily have to become action. Anger is initially just a thought. But when that thought is immediately connected to words, to actions, it becomes karma. And karma leaves its mark on relationships, on reputation, on future lives. When we create distance between anger and action, we are breaking the familiar chain of reactions, a chain that has been repeated for years, even generations. People who are quick-tempered often think, I can't control it. But the truth is, they've never tried to stop, because they're too used to reacting immediately. When they start practicing stopping, even if only for a very short time, they'll be surprised to find that anger isn't as strong as they thought. It's like a wave. If you don't immediately rush after it, the wave will subside on its own. This distance isn't repression. Repression is suppressing anger, but it still simmers inside. Staying mindful means acknowledging the anger as it is present, without adding fuel to the fire or resisting it. Just don't speak when you're angry. Don't make decisions when you're angry. Don't react when you're angry. That's already a huge karmic change. Because most bad karma doesn't arise from anger, but from actions taken after anger. A word spoken in anger can destroy years of hard work. An impulsive action can have consequences that last for years. But if those words haven't been spoken, if the action hasn't happened, if the karma hasn't taken shape. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng saw this very clearly. He didn't tell his disciples to eliminate emotions. He taught them to illuminate their path so they wouldn't be swept away. The gap between anger and action is where wisdom emerges. When there is this gap, we begin to have choices. We are no longer driven by anger as a blind reflex. Right now, we can choose to remain silent, choose to leave, choose to speak more slowly, choose to answer tomorrow. Those choices are blessings. From the outside, nothing might seem to change. But inside, an old karmic current is weakening, no longer nourished by familiar actions. Initially, this gap is very fragile. Sometimes we still slip, we still react. But if we can stop just once, if we don't act on anger, the karmic stream will have a crack. Each pause adds another layer of calm. The crack widens. Anger comes on more slowly. Impulsive actions occur less frequently. The consequences are less severe. Those who walk this path will realize you don't need to become gentle immediately. Just become a little slower. Slower than your own anger? Slowing down is wisdom. Slowing down is compassion for yourself. Because you're no longer pushing yourself into unnecessary trouble. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng taught that when the mind is not swayed by external circumstances cannot control the mind. When the mind is not driven by anger, anger cannot control the world. The gap between anger and action is where we regain that control. From the outside, it might just seem like silence. But from the inside, it's a silent revolution. Revolution is not noisy, but it is lasting. And when the distance becomes long enough, anger gradually loses its foothold. Not because it's being driven away, but because it no longer has anything to cling to. At that point, people no longer asked how to get rid of anger, because anger no longer had the power it once did. It just came, was seen, and then went away. Old karma is no longer sustained. New karma is not created. This is the transformation of karma, according to the spirit of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng. No grand ceremonies needed. No solemn vows required. Just each time you're angry, slow down a little. That's enough to change the course of a lifetime. The Sixth Patriarch Huineng never promised that practitioners would become emotionless. Nor did he teach to suppress or deny anger. What he pointed out was the path to letting anger no longer control one's life. Anger may still come, but it no longer dictates words. It no longer guides actions. It no longer creates karma that continues day after day. Just refrain from one impulsive word each day. Blessings will be retained without needing to seek them from anywhere far away. Many people think that spiritual practice is about doing something extraordinary. But according to the spirit of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng, spiritual practice is about being present in the everyday moment. When misunderstood, one should not rush to defend oneself with anger. When hurt, one should not immediately retaliate. When one's heart is boiling, one should know when to stop and breathe. Each time this happens, you are subtly redirecting your own destiny. Family tensions lessen. Relationships are less likely to break down. Your spirit is less worn out. And life gradually becomes lighter without needing to change your external circumstances. Anger doesn't disappear in a day, but it weakens little by little when you stop fueling it with actions. That's a slow but lasting and very real path. If you feel these teachings resonate with you, if you're looking to live a slower, gentler life and have fewer regrets later, please subscribe to the Simple Philosophy channel. Share this video with your loved ones. Let's learn together how to maintain inner peace amidst the many changes in life.